Okay, if there's one thing markets don't like, it's confusion. Markets like to know where we're going. And when we get situations like this, where on the 1 minute, Trump announces that there's going to be no tariffs on semiconductors coming in from China. And then a few days later, or a day or later, 𝗙𝗵𝗆𝗡 goes out and basically confirms that
Secretary of Commerce
there is going to be tariffs. They're just going to be coming up soon.
Thank you for being with us this morning. I really appreciate your time. So let's start with that news.
It's my pleasure.
Let's start with that news late Friday, this exemption on electronics, smartphones, laptop computers, and the like. What's the thinking? Why the exemption?
Well, if you remember, over the past couple of months, President Trump has called out pharmaceuticals and semiconductors and autos. He called them sector tariffs, and those are not.
So 𝗙𝗵𝗆𝗡 came out and he basically said there's a new kind of tariff, and that's basically a sector tariff, which no one had ever heard about until this interview. But then that was confirmed by Trump later on in the weekend, where he basically said, look, we are going to be introducing new tariffs. And so you're not really seeing it in the equity markets, but you are seeing it in the bond markets. Look at the 10-year, the US Treasury, the 10-year is basically back at 4.5%. Look at the 𝗥𝗢𝗄𝗧. I'm going to quickly call up the 𝗥𝗢𝗄𝗧 chart, which is now under $100, or just bounced above $100, but it's been living under $100 most of the day today. And so what we're getting is a massive sell-off of US treasuries and a massive dump of the US dollar. And that's because of the market confusion. And then speaking of a massive sell-off, I don't know if you guys have been following this story about Mantra, where basically $6 billion of market cap has pretty much been wiped out. It's one of the biggest wipeouts of any token ever. $6 billion wiped out in the last 24 hours. Today we've got a live interview with the founder of Mantra on the show. We're going to be talking about exactly what happened. A lot of people have basically said that this was a scam and stuff like that. We're going to dig into it and actually find out whether indeed this was a scam or whether there's something bigger at play here. So today we've got a massive show for you guys. As you can see, not in the studio, but a big show. Let's get the show on the road, guys. Tell you one thing, never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd see that Mantra bubble with 88% down in the center of the bubbles. I never thought that would happen. But we'll find out exactly what happened and exactly what caused that crash. We've got a live here with JP Mullen, who is one of the founders of Mantra. A lot of people actually called this a big scam. I don't know, is it a scam? Isn't it a scam? That's what we're going to be talking about. As I said yesterday when I joined the space, I said, I don't think it's a scam. I know this team very well. They're one of the hardest working teams in crypto. And I think we're going to get to the bottom of it today. We're also going to talk about the confusion in the markets. And boy, oh boy, there's massive confusion in the markets right now, because you can't really have an environment where you've got 1 second there are tariffs, the next second there aren't tariffs, before the markets open the tariffs are back again. Imagine you're an FD at a company and you've got to approve certain budget spend to open factories or to move your manufacturing back onshore, and you have no certainty around what's happening around tariffs. 1 minute there is tariffs, 1 minute there isn't tariffs. You simply are paralyzed and you're not going to make any investments, and that's a big risk. And that's why everyone's starting to dump United States T-bills and the dollar. And we're going to talk about what's going to happen, because a lot of people are actually saying that now the Fed is going to have to jump in. Someone says here, and Rani's using some good face creams. I'll put a referral link below for the face creams if you want them. So anyway, listen, if that sounds good to you, obliterate the like button, subscribe to the channel. As you can see, I'm actually on vacation, but I decided to bring you, I wasn't going to do any shows, but then I saw what happened yesterday with Mantra, and I was like, hold on a second. We got to be there, and we got to talk to the community. This is a token that we have been speaking about. This is one of the tokens that we have had a lot of coverage on, and is one of our favorite tokens. Let's say that. So let's talk about that today. Before we do though, we could just recap on what happened this weekend. So this weekend we actually had a very good weekend, right? So we had markets recover because Trump initially announced there was going to be no semiconductor tariffs. And that's a big deal. That semiconductor tariff is a big tariff, and we'll talk about that in a second. That news got Bitcoin to a point where it was almost breaking out. And the truth is, when I saw this breakout was imminent, I kind of said, hold on a second. I think that we're going to get a bounce in the US futures, and that will actually get Bitcoin to break out, and that will get the rest of the market to break out. And I thought my money was actually on Solana actually being one of the big ones to break out. But then, just when I thought we're going to have that special bounce, I was like, bang, we got 𝗙𝗵𝗆𝗡. And for those of you who don't know what 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 means, it's when 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 goes onto public television and pretty much then says, we're not, the are tariffs, they're just coming out at a later stage. So they're not included in the blanket tariffs, but they're coming out at a later stage. And that basically destroyed everything. And then Trump came out and basically reaffirmed that we're going to get those tariffs. And that basically destroyed everything. Bitcoin retreated a little bit. But what you're noticing now is that the equity markets are actually not really responding to all of this. I mean, you can look at the equity markets now. You have the S&P up. Let's quickly just look at the S&P. Let's quickly go here and just quickly look at what's happening here in the S&P. S&P is up 1.61% at the moment. So you got the S&P basically not really responding anymore to these tariffs. It's kind of moving beyond these tariffs. And I'll show you in a second why I think that's happening. And then as if that wasn't enough weekend action, then we got this whole thing on Mantra. And for those of you who weren't watching, again, about $6 billion of market cap were wiped out very, very, very quickly. No one knew exactly what happened. And I guess that this happened while the founders were actually asleep. I know the founders were actually in Korea, so the founders were actually asleep. So in one weekend, we got a $5.5 billion, what most people, a lot of people, actually called a rug. A lot of people accused this team of being scammers, accused this team of being rug. Someone says, like I told you, a scammy shitcoin that just lost 95% of its value. It's if a product has a shitty team, barely any TVL, and tens of billions of FTV, you know it's actually propped up. A few hours later, JP was woken up at his hotel, and he announced what they thought had happened at the time. And today we're going to get a lot more clarity around what actually happened. I've actually got JP here with me. So let me bring him on without any further delays. JP, how are you, my friend? It's been a rough night, right?
It's been a long day. Sorry, I still have the echo.
Okay, let me kill the echo. Hold on. Let me just kill this echo. Give me a second. Go. You shouldn't have an echo anymore.
All right, much better. Yeah, it's been a long day. We're starting the media frenzy. Was just on with Cointelegraph to talk about what happened and have a long night ahead. The team has been working throughout the day. We've been in contact with our investors, our exchange partners, our community as much as possible, and we're here to tell our side of the story. And appreciate you having us on so we can clarify what happened and talk about as much detail as we can about what occurred and what we're going to be doing about it going forward.
Okay, so let's talk about what happened. So you leave Paris,
Sure.
Everything's fine. Your token's trading at just over $6. You fly from Paris to Korea, where you guys were sponsoring an event, or you guys were sponsoring some real world. You were hosting a real world asset event, and then what happens? Like, walk me through what happened in your world.
Sure. So I went to sleep roughly around 12 midnight Korea time, and was woken up by the hotel calling me. Because no one could get a hold of me because my phone was on silent. I was supposed to be waking up around 6, but I was woken up at 5, obviously in a bit of a frenzy, and immediately started getting on to put together a message to the community about what we understood to happen. So this was very early, effectively in the middle of the night. There was massive forced liquidations on centralized exchanges where investors or groups of investors had 𝗏 leverage positions that utilize 𝗏 as collateral, and the positions were closed out and tokens were sold by exchanges, from what we can understand, which caused this precipitous cascade of selling and downward price spiral. So I was woken up to this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we can just look at the facts here. So when you say that that exchanges had massive forced liquidations, are you insinuating, or are you implying that certain investors of yours used 𝗏 as collateral for other positions, and when the other positions got to liquidation, the 𝗏 had to be liquidated?
I mean, we don't have a full transparency report of what happened on the exchanges yet, because obviously they're not going to be sharing that with us, and we're only hearing through what our investors are telling us what happened. But basically, investors had leverage positions. They used 𝗏 as collateral. This collateral was, taken over and sold, and that caused these, sharp liquidations on leverage positions in 𝗏, but potentially in other tokens as well.
So when I looked at this yesterday, I actually tweeted about this, and I said, look, it doesn't feel like a scam to me. And the reason why it didn't feel like a scam to me, I'm just trying to find my tweet here, is because if there's a scammer is not trying to sell as fast as possible. This is an event of someone trying to sell as many tokens as fast as possible, which almost feels like a programmed liquidation, almost like a system triggered liquidation. Is that what you suspect actually happened?
That is what we suspect actually happened. And obviously from our side, we want to, categorically deny team, investors, or any of our key partners have sold anything. Some of our key partners have put statements out, including their wallets, that will make sure that we have all the verifiable on-chain proof that we have not done anything in this situation. 𝗏𝗏 is one of those.
So yes, I see 𝗏𝗏, who's one of your partners, which is the big Dubai Abu Dhabi fund. They came out and they said, look, they haven't sold any tokens. They're fully in support of you guys. I know you also came out and said, look, let's get a couple of things straight. The Telegram was not deleted, although some people were posting screenshots that the Telegram group was deleted. What's the background there?
I mean, just go look at the. Can you scroll up a little bit and look at that Telegram? It says it has 60 members. Yes. We have hundreds of thousands of members in our actual Telegram group. Basically, what happened is one of those Telegram defense bots called Rose kicked in when there was this influx of people coming in, because obviously there was a lot of frenzy, and it basically stopped new joiners from coming because it felt like it was like a DDoS attack effectively. So we figured that out and disabled that feature, but the Telegram was never closed. It was just this bot came in and stopped people from joining for an hour or so, I think. But this was all overnight.
I'm assuming that the exchange that triggered the liquidations was OKX, and the reason is their CEO basically came out and he calls this thing a big scandal to the whole crypto industry. All of the on-chain unlock and data and deposit data is public. All major exchanges, collateral and liquidation data can be investigated. OKX will make the reports ready. I mean, is it safe to assume that OKX was the exchange?
I would prefer not to comment on that at the moment. We're, in communication with our exchange partners, but we're also in communication with regulators and making sure that our legal rights are maintained. And we're obviously communicating with our investors to understand what legal remedies we may have, because we do feel like our community, our investors, and our token holders were wronged here.
Okay, and I mean, what's the plan from here? So what happens here? I mean, first of all, is the project well funded? Can you guys continue to operate? Is the project a well-funded continuing project?
Yeah, so the project is solvent, it's funded. We have ample runway to continue to develop the business and build out the business. We have, been in contact with all of our partners and investors as well, who've been graciously extending support. Many additional investors have reached out to say if they can, support us, whether that's by loaning us capital or buying tokens. So we've actually seen increased interest in many cases, which is really great to see. It shows that we do have a very strong team, a very strong core to the project. Right now we're trying to get out ahead of it. Thank you for having me on so we can, talk about what's going on. I want to address all the concerns as transparently and directly as possible. So as I was already on with Cointelegraph, I'm going to be on with Zach Guzman from Coinage later, and then CoffeeZilla after. So we're going to continue to have this media, roadshow of sorts, just to make sure that we get the message out there. We're going to be putting, together very deep, post-mortem of what actually happened, verifying all, public wallets on chain. We already put out a transparency report last week, actually, that showed all the team and project wallets. And we'll continue to, add levels of transparency to that. Our investors will do the same. 𝗏𝗏 already posted their wallets. Laser will be doing the same, and we'll continue to, provide any details that we can to show that verifiably on chain that not a single token was sold by the team or our key partners and investors. We're in the process of putting together some sort of buyback and burn mechanism. So these will be two separate things. We're figuring out exactly what the mechanisms and mechanics of that will look like, but there would be some sort of buyback program to support the project in the market. But we'll also be looking to figure out what we can do to actually burn supply. I'm more than happy to take the brunt of that myself personally first.
Wow. Okay. So lots of plans to actually get the project to recover. And I think very good to know that the project isn't going to recover. Isn't going to go down. Where can we get more information? What's the best source of information to know exactly what's going on? Is it your Twitter, the team Twitter? What's the best place to get updates?
Right now, probably my Twitter. I want all the comms to come from me directly on this one. And obviously the main Twitter account will be resharing, everything. So my Twitter is JP_Mullen 888.
Okay, amazing. JP, listen, if anything else we can do for you, let us know, and also keep us updated of next steps here. Amazing.
100%. We'll make sure to share everything with you guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, buddy. All right, so we now know that, I mean, this is not what people were talking about, an exit scam or whatever else. It certainly wasn't one of those. But I mean, it isn't a good look, and it is a $6 billion wipeout of the altcoin market. And it doesn't give, I mean, at a point like this where there's very little liquidity in the market, we can't really afford $6 billion to actually be wiped out. So, but I guess for us in crypto, just another day in crypto, and let's hope that this project actually comes out of it, because I do think this is one of the good projects. And I've seen these guys. These guys have been operating for many years to try and get this project to work. So let's hope they can actually trade out of it. And I think they will, but let's keep our eye on it. Anyway, let's move back to markets. Let's look at what's happening on markets. As I said to you, the S&P is open. The S&P is 1.1% up. You can see, let's quickly get to the stock bubbles and just look at what the stock bubbles are doing. Palantir up 5.22%, Berkshire up 1.6%, Google up 1.5%. You can get all of this on your stocks bubbles. It's both on the app, on Banter Bubbles app, and on banterbubbles.com. You got now stocks and you got crypto. If I look at international indices, so one thing about the international indices is most the international indices were actually up, and the VIX is coming down pretty sharply. The VIX is down 11.82%. What this is telling you is that the equity markets are not really as perturbed anymore about the China-US trade war. And I'll show you a few of the things that are happening in the escalation of the trade war, and how the markets are pretty much reacting positively and pretty much looking straight through this trade war. Pretty much every market in the world was green today. I mean, you can see this. There were some big moves and some small moves, but generally the markets are pretty much up today. Nasdaq up 2.06, S&P up 1.81 when this screenshot was taken. Bitcoin threatening to break this to the upside. We need a daily close above, let's call it above 85,000 just to be safe. We need a daily close above 85,000 to break above the trend line, which is a good one. One other chart that I was actually looking at this week was 𝗙𝗏, and the reason why I was looking at it, you'll see I actually marked the chart when I thought there was max FUD. So you see, I actually marked the chart over here when I thought there was max FUD, and you can see that every time I've marked this chart around max FUD, pretty much we bounce up here, and it just shows the trajectory of 𝗙 against ETH, right? So it just shows that 𝗙 is basically obliterating ETH. Another thing we have the RSIs, the weekly RSIs breaking out on Bitcoin. So you have the RSIs breaking out, and generally when that's happened before on the RSIs, you've basically got quite significant uptrend. So everything posting to quite big uptrends on the crypto markets coming up. Hopefully, because I think we really do deserve at least like 7 green days in a row. Let me know if you agree with me, and if you do, just obliterate the like button. I think after all we've been through, after like we've had the markets collapse, we've had stock markets collapse, we've had altcoins get absolutely wrecked. We had the ETH massive liquidation, and I guess we deserve a little bit of a pump for holding on for so long. We have Powell speaking this week, so we have a lot of Fed speakers this week. I don't think the Fed speakers this week are relevant, but I do think that Powell speaking on Wednesday may be relevant, because he hasn't spoken much since the trade war with China and the US. So I actually really want to see what he comes out there. I also want to talk about the trade war and the confusion that it's causing, because you know, one thing markets don't like confusion. They don't mind if it's good or bad, but they just want to know where they stand, right? What they don't like, markets don't like surprises. That's the problem. They don't like surprises, and they don't like confusion. And the problem is that now there is a lot of confusion. And in fact, if you ask me, I kind of feel like the US feels like they are unorganized, and that their communication is not coming through very well. And that's not doing the US any favors, right? I mean, first you have the semiconductor tariffs. Then all of a sudden there's no semiconductor tariffs. Then they are, but they're just coming back a bit later. Now, I read this tweet, and this tweet kind of summarized it for me. So it said, look, since Wednesday, which is less than a week ago, we had a universal reciprocal tariff, a removal back down to 10%, an additional 50% Chinese tariff, an additional 90% Chinese tariff, 104% Chinese tariff, 125% Chinese tariff, 145% Chinese tariff, electronics potentially exempted, and electronics now potentially fully back on, but just through a different set of tariffs. Now, question: if you were the CFO or the CEO or the board of an S&P 500 company, and you were contemplating bringing your production back into the United States. But in order to bring your production back into the United States, you had to invest a lot of money in factories, in machinery, in industrial stuff. Question is, would you do it? And then the next question is, how would you budget for it? Because if you don't know what your savings are relative to the tariff price, if you don't know what the cost is to manufacture it and to bring it in from overseas, you cannot do projections and you cannot do viability studies. I mean, most suppliers have actually just stopped bringing in goods. And the reason why they stopped bringing in goods, they're basically saying, look, we can't price the goods. We just don't know if it's viable to bring in the goods or not to bring in the goods. That's pretty much what's actually happened. I mean, as we said, I'm not going to play the video again, but 𝗏💩 did actually mention, he said, look, we do want to bring all the manufacturing onshore. Specifically, the manufacturing that's important to us is key manufacturing, things like semiconductors, things like pharmaceuticals. Because what they realized during COVID is that you cannot have critical supplies controlled by potential enemies, right? You cannot have critical supplies controlled by potential enemies. What we saw with COVID is we saw that the masks were coming from China, certain medical supplies were coming from China, but the virus actually also came from China. And if that was a malicious attack, then effectively it's an attack which could have crippled the United States. So they are adamant to bring this up, but I think the way that they're doing it and the communication that they're doing around it, I think the way that they've done it is they should have done it more gradually. I think that them imposing these crazy tariffs on partner nations, I understand why they're doing it, because they want to negotiate better terms and better settlement deals or better deals with potential partners. But I do think that right now the US is the one taking most of the heat. And I followed this tweet from Nick says, oh, you thought the tariff exemption for electronics were permanent? Well, you thought wrong. They're temporary. They'll come in a month or so, or maybe not. More details in the next press conference, or maybe not. But we're bringing manufacturing back, or maybe not. That's the problem. No one knows exactly what's happening. And that's what's going on. The White House actually denies that there should have been any confusion. And actually on paper, the White House is right. They're saying, the White House published a note titled Clarification of Exceptions under Executive Order 14257 on April 11th. Certain goods apparently were never supposed to be subject to reciprocal tariffs announced on April 2nd. Most media outlets thought that the April 11th clarification posted by the White House was a new list of exemptions. And so the White House is kind of saying, look, this is exactly what was intended. But rather these goods were never actually subject to tariffs. And so what they're saying is, Trump is saying that the fake news media is trying to get people confused. I just think the situation is very, very, very confusing. And if you want to know how big the tariffs are, just here's some perspective for you. The US imports about $100 billion of computers, smartphones, and chip making things from China. A total of $439 billion of goods were imported from China. So about $100 billion of $439 billion is exempt from the big tariffs and falls under the small tariffs, right? That means that 23% of all Chinese imports coming from the United States are exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, but they are still subject to the 20% tariff or 10%. No one actually knows what it basically is. So as I said, the equity markets are starting to look straight through this. And the equity markets are starting to price in that potentially there's going to be a deal or something along the lines. But the one market that is not pricing this is actually, well, two markets that are not pricing in a deal very soon is, number one, the 10-year treasury yield, the government debt, and in the same line is the 𝗥𝗢. So what this shows is that foreigners are actually dumping the United States. They're dumping US T-bills, and therefore they're forcing the price of T-bills down and they're forcing the yields up. At the same time, they are dumping US dollars because when they sell their T-bills, they get US dollars and they're basically dumping the dollars over here. And so you can see that what we're getting the US 10-year flying. It's actually a little bit better today, 10 bips down today. But in general, I mean, you can see that it has gone up. It has gone up, let's have a look here. From 3.8 to right now. It's gone 13%. I just want to show you, I was messing around with ChatGPT just to show you a scenario. And I said, look, I wanted to understand what is the difference in what the US government can raise when the rates drop. So on $1 million T-bill, a 10-year T-bill at 4.5%, the US government's getting 643,000, assuming a no coupon T-bill. But if the rates drop to 3.5%, they're getting 708,000 for each one of them, which means they're taking more debt. And so that's why it's important to get the US T-bill, the rates to actually go down, right? And I think Jamie Dimon's actually right here. He came out and he basically said, look, he expects a kerfuffle in the US Treasury market that will prompt Federal Reserve intervention. Dimon attributes turmoil to all market rules and regulations, and what he's advocating for is he's advocating for a bank rule change, which will allow the banks to be to stay solvent in the situation. And so I think that the narrative now is that they're waiting for the Fed to act, and the Fed speakers have actually come out and said that they could potentially act. If they act, what it means is that they're going to either loosen bank regulation or they're going to put more money into the economy. Either the Fed themselves is going to buy the T-bills, putting more money into the economy, or they're going to loosen the regulations on the banks, and let the banks buy the T-bills, and that again puts more money into the economy. So there we go. So that's pretty much what's happening now. I want to also talk a little bit about the trade war with China, because I think that that's the part that needs to be resolved here. When China was also confused and they thought that Trump was removing the tariffs, they pretty much said that this tariff exemption is a small step towards correcting the wrongdoings that it had done to China. And they urged the United States to actually drop all the tariffs. But then obviously Trump came out and said, look, there's going to be tariffs and we're going to announce a whole lot of new tariffs on Monday, right? That's pretty much what happened. Now, as 𝗙𝗏𝗡𝗪 says here, he says, one country has been strategically preparing for this moment for decades. The other one is making it up as it goes along. That's exactly what it feels like right now. It doesn't feel like the US is in the driving seat. It doesn't feel like the US is in control. It feels like the US is trying to bully China, but China seems pretty prepared for this. China's not panicking. As the US raised tariffs, then China raised tariffs. And the US raised tariffs more, China raised tariffs more. Now China has basically said, look, we're suspending the export of certain rare earth minerals and magnets that are crucial for world car, semiconductor, and aerospace industries. Okay, that's a big one because China has a complete monopoly on these rare earth minerals that are required for this manufacturing. And actually, the US is screwed without China. So I read this tweet, it says, what happens if the US and China announce a trade embargo? Meaning that the US isn't sending stuff to China and China is not sending stuff to the United States anymore. What happens? So here he says, China can easily replace US imports, its imports from the US, but the US cannot replace its imports from China. So the US is actually in a much worse situation. China exporters will be hurt temporarily, but those factories are going nowhere. The government can always borrow cheap and support industries that get hurt. US consumers will find Walmart shelves 40% empty, no solar panels, no electronics, no aerospace, no weapons, etc., because China controls the minerals to produce them. So I do think that the US is playing a very, very, very dangerous game here, because it does feel like China's been preparing for this for a long time, and that the US is trying to bully China. And ultimately, what I tweeted last night was I said, look, what this feels like is it feels like two parents getting divorced, and then you've got two parents getting divorced, and then you've got the markets and the investors in the markets as the kids. Now, mommy and daddy aren't talking to each other anymore, and so they keep sending each other these horrible messages, either via text or whatever else, but all they need to do is sit down around a table. All they need to do is sit down around a table. That's it. And they're not doing that. And I believe that very soon, with this escalation, they're going to have to sit down around a table. Because, when you start blocking rare earth minerals, that's quite a big one. That's like, there's certain places you don't want to go, and that's one of the places that you kind of thought we would never go, but now we're going there. And that just shows that that very, very, very soon, we will need mommy and daddy to sit down at the table and to discuss some kind of potential solution. And I think that's what the equity markets are showing us at the moment. We know equity markets are forward-looking. And we know that every time Trump has spoken, it has done damage. But the damage has become less and less and less and less and less, right? And so what you get here is you're getting the equity markets running. The 10-year still needs to soften. I actually hope it softens with Fed intervention, because that will mean more money into the economy. It'll mean the markets start running a little bit more. It'll mean Bitcoin starts to run a little bit more. So I think you need to watch 3 charts. You need to watch the Dixie. You need to watch for a breakdown of the Dixie. You need to watch the 10-year, the US 10-year, and make sure that this chart comes down. And then just watch the Bitcoin chart and see if we actually get this breakout that I was speaking about over here. If we can get this breakout over here, then I think we actually can we can take it one step higher. In the meantime, we do have the SPX death cross happening today. It literally is happening today. I looked at it. I looked at past. In the past, mainly, usually after the death cross, markets carried on going down. I'll be honest. I looked at 2020. From the death cross to the bottom, there was another 35%. That was obviously COVID. Then we had another one in 2011, and again we went from the death cross to the bottom, 8%. So usually there is a little bit more downside after the death cross. Again, this happened in 2022. So you see, we had the death cross and we carried on going down. Let's hope that this time is actually different. But I need to put on your roadmap that this is actually happening out there. We already spoke about the 𝗖𝗍𝗍𝗘 chart. So yeah, that is pretty much what's going on. Let's read some comics. Let's read some comments. Run still holds mantra. Don't be exit liquidity for this scam. I do hold my mantra. Of course, I do hold some. I took profits on some, but I do hold some mantra. It is one of the projects that I actually do like. I think that, you know, when I get into these projects, I know exactly what the risks are. I'm not oblivious to risks, and I know that not every project is going to survive. I do think that this one actually survives, and let's just wait and see what actually happens. Someone says OM is done forever. 90% of tokens are for people who invented OM. Let's have a look at who else is here. Real world asset is Algorand. Okay. Is Algorand still a thing? Didn't know that. All right. One last point. If you are a member of Frontrunners and you want to get yourself one of the whitelist spots for Vultisig. Now, this is super important. This is only for Frontrunners members, right? Frontrunners members, there is a link below. You can get $10,000 of a whitelist to invest $10,000 in the Vultisig project. Now, for those who don't know what Vultisig is a MPC wallet, it's the first consumer-centric MPC wallet, which is quite big. The FDV at which the $10,000 happens is at $3 million FDV. So if the project launches anything above $3 million, you're basically up. And I think this project can launch an easy $40, $50, $60 million. So you could make a 10x. This is only for Frontrunners members. So if you are a member of Frontrunners, fill in the form. There's a link below. And you guys will get up to $10,000. Up to $10,000. Anyway, before we go, let's quickly look at the newsroom. See that there hasn't been any breaking news while we've been here. Trump effect. Chips making behemoth NVIDIA just announced that they will be building the AI supercomputers in the United States. I've seen that came out a few minutes ago. 10-year yield falls 10 basis points on the day. We've seen that. The show is really up to date. All right, I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Tomorrow we got Ben Cowan on the show. So we've got a big show with Ben Cowan tomorrow. And then I'm on vacation. Then you guys need to watch the markets and leave me alone so I can have 3 days of vacation. And then I'll be back on Monday. So I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Until then, trade well, my friends.